All Indiana Politics is your premier source for Indiana politics, focusing on issues that matter to you.
I still want us to be the best in the Midwest.
We can't afford another lockdown.
Give the citizens of this country the relief they need.
Education in the state of Indiana remains priority number one.
In-depth, nonpartisan coverage.
We don't know exactly where the economy will be in January.
People are worried with good reason.
Exclusive interviews with Indiana's political leaders.
We have the resources here in the state of Indiana to care for those who are in need.
Expert analysis on critical legislation.
We need to reform those laws.
This recovery is going to take some time.
We've got to anticipate that there'll be a budget shortfall.
From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Good Sunday morning. Welcome to another edition of All Indiana Politics. I'm Phil Sanchez. Indiana will be short nearly $2.5 billion in revenue over the next 2 years. Now, lawmakers have just days to plug the hole as we enter the final week of the session. Now, lawmakers first got a revenue forecast back in December. They used those numbers for most of their budget negotiations. Then on Wednesday, a new forecast showed Indiana will take in less revenue than expected. Between now and the end of the 2027 budget year, $2.4 billion, which is about 3.5% of the total revenue. Lawmakers now are trying to figure out what they'll have to cut to fill that hole. That could mean cuts to services that you rely on. Our government reporter Garrett Berquist talked to lawmakers and experts about the situation.
Top leaders say nothing is off the table. They say they will try to minimize cuts to the most critical programs, but the state budget doesn't leave a lot of room to tinker. State lawmakers have 1 week to make up $2.4 billion. That's a little less than 3.5%.
They're working through the line items. I think the thing that we want to protect and hold to the longest is trying to protect K-12. That's a big priority, I think, for everyone. But, you have to look at everything and find as many efficiencies as you can.
K-12 education is nearly half of the state budget. After that comes Medicaid and higher education. Public safety and child services round out the top 5 spending categories.
There are 3 reasons: tariffs, tariffs, and tariffs. It is exclusively a consequence of the very deep economic shock that is beginning to wrap around the country and much of the globe.
Hicks says economic turmoil could lead to more demand for services such as Medicaid, right as those services get cut. He says it will be very hard for lawmakers to avoid cutting top categories, including K through 12.
Indiana state government's very lean, and there are only 2 or 3 big areas that we spend money in: Medicaid and match. And in K through 12 and higher education, and then the rest of the budget is very small, and so it's very difficult to get from here to there without touching these other areas.
Former State Senator Jim Merritt disagrees. He says the tariff situation and the economic issues they cause could be solved just as quickly as they started.
Well, I don't know if you need to cut. I think monitor is something that needs to happen because this is a very conservative budget, because we don't know what the grants of the federal government to the state of Indiana, because we don't know what the impact of tariff policy is going to be in Washington. I think there are ways to micromanage this in the next 2 years.
Merritt suggests frequent revenue updates throughout the year and possibly a special budget session next year. He says lawmakers could also consider delaying funds doled out to counties and let the counties run off of their savings for a few months. He says they used that tactic during the financial crisis in 2008 and 2009.
We don't know what tariffs are going to be permanent. We don't know what tariffs are going to be considered. There could be zero baseline tariff with Mexico and Canada by 10 days from now. We just don't know.
At the State House, I'm Garrett Berquist for Wish TV, wishtv.com, or follow us on Facebook for updates.
Well, Senate leaders say they hope to have a new spending plan as early as tomorrow, and Senate Democrats have their own ideas how to plug the hole. Here's what they had to say after the session wrapped up on Thursday afternoon.
Everything's on the table. There'll be things we look at first rather than other things. But I think with a change like this of $2.4 billion, you have to keep everything on the table. So we're going to first look very hard at cuts to make sure we do that. We're going to look at some cuts before others. For instance, K through 12 public education. We want to try and stay away from that if it's at all possible. The challenge, of course, is though that with that item of the budget being almost half of our budget, it's really hard to make that up everywhere else without touching that. But we're going to work really hard to try to do that.
Should the income tax cuts and for that matter, the cuts on Senate Bill 1 be put on hold while we figure out what's going to happen?
Well, so with regard to the Senate Bill 1, that's a different funding source. Our budget doesn't deal with property taxes. It deals with income tax, sales tax, things of that nature. And the thing about Senate Bill 1 and dealing with property taxes, those are much more stable than the income tax and sales tax that's in the rest of our budget. And so, those things go back to local governments. Those aren't going to drop like has been forecast in the income and sales tax. And so those are much more reliable than these other numbers are.
What about income taxes? Should we put on hold the next planned reduction in income taxes?
That certainly is on the table, absolutely.
Is there a possibility you might end up doing a special budget session during what would normally be the short session?
No, I guess that's a possibility, but we don't ever like to open the budget during a short session. There might be some things we have to do to tweak in the past that we have done, but we want to avoid that. To hopefully have something ready to really present to our caucuses by Monday, and if that's the case, it takes a while. It's a big budget. It takes a while. Once you agree to everything, it takes a while to get that together in a form that then our members can comb through, go through, read, and understand. So we'll have to have something pretty early next week in order to be successful in doing that, but that is our intention.
Our caucus has been serious about making sure we create an MCAF, similar to the hospital fee, but doing that with our managed care insurance companies when we rolled out pathways, putting on a fee to the insurance companies who have been identified as our MCEs. That's one way that we could address our $2.4 billion shortfall. We also talked about making sure that our income tax, the bill, and providing an income tax reduction, if we just pause that and roll that out when we have more certainty of our economic future for Indiana, just pausing it, definitely not canceling it, but pausing it for 2 years. And then, of course, the legalization of marijuana, regulating and legalizing cannabis, having that conversation, because we know that our neighboring states are being impacted by the revenues in those states. Why not do that in Indiana and speak to and have a grown-up conversation about the protections that we need to put in place and in the process address our revenue shortage? And finally, maintaining the voucher expansion at the 2021 levels. So those ideas would get us so close, actually, I would say over. Those ideas together at $3.57 billion. So if every option is on the table, we're excited to work with our Republican counterparts and come up with real solutions.
All right, coming up, state lawmakers try to shut down an East Central Indiana school corporation. How the superintendent says he plans to fight back. Welcome back. During negotiations over the property tax overhaul, lawmakers slipped in a provision that will dissolve the Union School Corporation. The leader of that system says he's not letting lawmakers shut them down without a fight. He talked to our Hernan Gutierrez.
The superintendent of Union Schools tells me that they're looking to file an injunction against the amendments to the new law targeting his schools. The district serves about 300 students in person in Henry and Randolph counties, but it also teaches nearly 9,000 students online through a partnership with the Indiana Digital Learning School. The superintendent believes that they are being targeted partly because of those services online.
The movie Hoosiers, imagine shutting down that school. Well, that's what they're doing.
Galen Mast is in his first year as superintendent of Union Schools in Modoc, Indiana.
only about a 20-minute drive to the state line with Ohio. A last-minute amendment to the state's property tax overhaul singles out the rural school district, dissolving it in 2027. Mass says in his 30 years in education, he's never seen any of his schools targeted like this.
It's a sorrow that the legislators would do this to another school when their own kids go to school, the grandkids go to school. They would never do it to their own.
The district employs about 80 people in person and another 300 teachers for their online students. Some of them, like Lindsay Clark, grew up in the rural community.
We always need teachers, and so I could find somewhere else to be, but I don't want to be anywhere else. I want to be here, giving back to the community that gave to me.
Jama Marlowe graduated from Union Schools and now teaches civics there.
I have tried to teach and instill that our way of government is very productive and prosperous and good. When a school is gone, the community dies.
The lawmakers who represent the area are State Senator Scott Alexander and Representative J.D. Prescott, both Republicans. Both declined News 8's request for an interview. Their offices issued similar statements citing low test scores, justifying the amendment to dissolve Union Schools. Mass calls their argument a red herring, saying other schools with lower test scores were not singled out.
And many of those 9,000 students are the students that the schools didn't want. Couldn't make it work within the brick and mortar school.
The head of the district says he's ready to fight in the weeks to come.
We're going to keep our doors open for years to come because we have a wonderful community here.
I'm Renan Gutierrez for HTV, WishTV.com, or follow us on Facebook for updates.
All right, coming up, a $2.4 billion revenue shortage. Sounds like a job for Indiana's best political team. We weigh the state's options. Next. Welcome back to All Indiana Politics as we welcome in two members of Indiana's best political team, Republican Mario Maslamani and Democrat Lindsay Hake. Good to see you both. Always like to have you here. Let's begin with the revenue shortfall. Mario, how realistic is to avoid cutting K through 12?
I think both sides have decided that's something they're not going to get done. So both sides, the House, the Senate, Democrats, Republicans, they've agreed that I believe that education is one thing that they will not put on the table as a cut. So I think that there's still opportunities to make sure that we cover this budget shortfall. One thing that I'd talk to Lindsay a little bit is I don't understand why we don't have annual budgets. Mm-hmm. If we had annual budgets, it would make a lot more sense because, the tariffs are going to be one of the big issues that are creating the shortfall. But if we've solved that problem, we fix that problem, then next year we might have this surplus of revenue that we need to give back, but we have to wait 2 years to do that. And so I think that's, if we had annual budgets, it would solve a lot of problems.
Well, that was one of my questions here today, so why don't we jump into that? How realistic, Lindsay, would that be? Do you think we ever will get to annual budgets? Because right now, as our viewers probably know, and you guys know, it's every other year.
Right. So at least here in Indiana. Now other states do it differently, but other states also don't have a short-term legislature. They come in every year. They're full-time. They're not half-time legislature. And so what unfortunately doesn't work for that scenario, and while I hear the merits for that 100%, what doesn't work for that scenario is the uncertainty that's being painted right now for our fiscal picture from the federal level, right? I mean, that tariff conversation is completely changing things. You saw Tom Jackson, our fiscal consultant at the state revenue meeting this week, just talking about the uncertainty, all of the tariff uncertainty and the flex that's happening with our national picture. And that was due much, frankly, to President Trump. And so that uncertainty is affecting many sectors. And I just don't, that was $2.4 billion revenue short of our revenue picture. And so that's based on the December numbers.
Sure.
So it's only going to get worse.
From where you see things right now, what do you think will be chopped? Where do you think there will be cuts?
I don't know. Obviously, on Monday morning, House Bill 1001 has its first conference committee report hearing, and that's in Ways and Means at 11 a.m. if anyone wants to play from home. But what I'll also tell you is that there's a lot that's in the. My concern is more what's in the budget versus what's not yet in the budget. As it stands right now, we've got a really nice. Frankly, packaged up with a bow gift to big business, and you have a lot of cuts for Medicaid and other social services and frankly, services that make life a possibility for vulnerable Hoosiers every day.
Mario, your thoughts?
I think that the cigarette tax is something that we'll see an increase in. I think that there's still some opportunity to deal with this issue. One thing that I didn't realize was that Indiana is the third most reliant state on imports from China. Mm-hmm. And so these tariffs are playing a significant part in this budget shortfall or this revenue shortfall. In 2023, China imported $6.1 billion of Hoosier goods, Indiana's goods. And so if Trump and China were able to fix that tariff issue, a lot of this will be solved and a lot of this will be reconciled. So I think there's still time for us to deal with this issue. I think that, people are concerned, but I would tell them, hold off. I think that there's still an opportunity for us to get this all resolved by the cigarette tax, by some other means in which we can kind of create some revenue or generate revenue or to surpass some of the shortfall.
So you do think Republicans will be on board with the cigarette tax?
I think so. Okay. I think so. And from, they call it a sin tax, right? Mm-hmm. Gambling, cigarettes, liquor. Listening to some of the Republicans in the House and the Senate, they said everything's on the table except education. And so I think that that's an opportunity.
How about some of the ideas that Senator Yoder raised? And do you think those are realistic at all?
I don't. Yeah. There is no way that Indiana is going to legalize marijuana. I don't think that's an option. Lindsay and I were joking that we will probably be the last state to legalize marijuana. And I honestly think that should be something that should be the last resort, because looking at some of these other states that are surrounding us, when you legalize marijuana, there's issues to our healthcare system. There's issues to our criminal justice system that are not factored in. And so I think that that's something that should be off the table.
Lindsay, I'll let you respond to that as well.
Sure. There are other taxes, too, and fees that we've not talked about yet. And one of those amendments that was rejected during the conversation on House Bill 1001 last week when it was debated in front of the Senate was a fee for managed care entities that could pay for Medicaid as we have pictured right now in the financial picture. That's about $1 billion. And to cover our expenses for what we have now and what we're projected to have, much less if it continues to grow. Though, as we noted, Senator Mishler said himself that the growth has somewhat stalled. So that for the state is a good thing. But making sure that we don't have wait lists to access this health care that takes care of our most medically vulnerable Hoosiers and medically complex Hoosiers too. These are kids that will not get better, sadly, that are on those waivers. And so we can't have wait lists for that type of programming or for that type of funding. They have to get that care.
Right. So how did we get there, right? That's the question.
Right, and so that fee on the managed care entities was rejected in the Senate, but I think it needs to come back.
Well, we'll see. At some point maybe, former Senator Jim Merritt, we heard him earlier in the show, he said, hey, look, we don't know where the tariffs, to your point, Mario, are gonna lead us. So he says, kind of maybe take a pause on this. Is there a possibility, Mario, of maybe that we're overcorrecting here?
I think there is.
Yeah.
And that's what I've been hearing from some of the Republicans at the State House is that, let's wait and see, because even when we implemented tariffs to Mexico and China, Mexico and Canada, there were agreements fairly quickly. Mm-hmm. I just was reading that Trump is working with the EU and also with Europe in England, and that there might be some sort of agreement. So while we are so reliant on China importing our goods here in the state of Indiana, I think that at some point this is going to be fixed, and this is going to be resolved before the end of the year, because neither China nor the U.S. can have this tariff war without having some significant impact to their citizens.
Sure. Lindsay?
Yeah, I mean, I really hope the conversation simply stops, because it's driving such uncertainty and fear into Hoosiers and Americans' lives. You're essentially playing a game where the poorest and most vulnerable citizens are a pawn in the political conversation in the Indiana State House, and that is because of this larger federal conversation that involves these complex initiatives where we've proposed cutting $880 billion from the national budget, and this is something that will simply it will continue the haves and have-nots in Indiana politics.
If I can push back a little bit to Lindsay's point, China is a big problem. Mitt Romney talked about it years ago. China steals our intellectual property. They steal our goods. They steal our technology. We don't have any recourse in China. If they were stealing our intellectual property, we can't sue them in China. What's crazy is China can sue us in the United States. And so Trump is trying to make sure that we are in a fair playing field, or not even fair, but as fair as can be. And so that's why I believe that it's important that we try to get a better agreement with China. Unfortunately, we are so reliant, Indiana is so reliant on China, being the third most reliant state. We are facing that impact more so than other states.
Quickly, 30 seconds left. Will we have a budget by the end of the week? Mario?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not going to make everybody happy.
I love
obviously.
it when we agree on everything.
Yeah.
At least on something.
Mostly.
Well, if they want to get out by the 24th, as they've said they've wanted to, they have to have some answers this week.
And they will.
History tells us they probably want to get out. I would imagine. We'll see what happens. Good to see you both in studio, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, love to be here.
Yeah, we'll be right back. All right, thank you for joining us this week for All Indiana Politics. We'll be back here, as we always are, next Sunday morning, 9:30. Stay tuned, though, throughout the week as we cover the final days of the 2025 legislative session. And be sure to check out the All Indiana Politics podcast online at wishtv.com. Have a great rest of your weekend.
From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network. Watch All Indiana Politics live Sunday mornings at 9:30 on Wish TV and at wishtv.com. Subscribe to this podcast and listen weekly here on the All Indiana Podcast Network. And be sure to discover even more great podcasts at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.